From 8 on your side, your local election headquarters. This is Battleground, Florida, Sunday edition.
Good morning. I'm Evan Donovan. Welcome to Battleground, Florida. This week, the first COVID-19 vaccine began to arrive in Florida. It was sent to 5 hospitals, including Tampa General. But Governor Ron DeSantis is already warning there are issues with the next round of shipments from Pfizer's vaccine. Pfizer says there are no issues. Meanwhile, several Florida newspapers are suing DeSantis to release White House coronavirus task force reports that DeSantis has not been making public. Joining me today to break down this state of affairs are Kenya Woodard, a freelance journalist in Florida, Peter Schorsch, publisher of FloridaPolitics.com, and Steve Lemongello, politics editor at the Orlando Sentinel. Good morning to you all. Steve, I want to start with you. Your paper is one of those suing DeSantis over these reports. What they show, what they're asking effectively, is kind of against some of the things that DeSantis is doing.
Yeah, it recommended, closing bars, for example, closing or restricting a lot of areas where people would be inside without masks. It did warn several times that Florida was entering like a red zone from the yellow zone. But in the very few, public appearances that DeSantis had in November, he mostly was, below the radar after the election. He essentially said he's not going to have any further COVID restrictions, no more shutdowns, businesses open, things like that.
And Peter, anything in these reports that has stood out to you now that we've seen some of them?
It's been a mixed bag for them all along, especially on transparency issues. And I can't tell you how many times I've asked the governor's office, please, you have so many self-inflicted errors by not being more transparent. These are documents actually that they also go out to the county health departments. They're very easily accessible. I mean, ProPublica showed that you can get to these documents, but there is just something in Ron DeSantis, and I don't know where it comes from psychologically, but he is so stubborn when it comes to transparency issues. And at this point, I got to ask the question, if as we read that the state of Florida is having now, we're not getting as much of the vaccine as we thought we were going to get, and the excuse for why DeSantis has been out of the picture for the last month since the election has been that he has been working on securing a larger share for Florida of the vaccine. Then what did he do for the last 6 weeks? And so, that's the big problem that I have for it. And I'm glad that Steve, and, the Sentinel, it kind of sucks that they have to sue at this point. We should not have an adversarial relationship. But then let me just pivot and say, I think part of the problem is DeSantis gets dumped on so much by the national media, vis-a-vis like his performance versus Cuomo of New York or Newsom of California, that he's just got his hackles up.
And Kenya, we know that this virus is hitting communities of color harder than others. Some of these strategies that have been put in place seemingly put them at more risk.
Exactly, which is why some direction from DeSantis would be great. I think that would help in terms of getting more folks to get more serious about taking precautions, wearing masks, social distancing, things of that nature. We've been looking for this ever since the pandemic hit, ever since March. We've been looking for some kind of direction from the state and have yet to receive it. And to piggyback on Peter's point about DeSantis getting beat up in the press, he's the governor. He's supposed to be taking a lead on these things, and we just haven't seen much of that in these last few months since the pandemic hit. So.
Yeah, Peter, to your point about what was DeSantis doing during that time where he's out of the public eye, there was a skit on Saturday Night Live during the Weekend Update this past weekend about, when are we going to get the vaccine, who's going to get it, where's it going to, it just seems like we don't know the answers to those questions, and it seems like we probably should.
Yeah, and there's a completely different way that he could be conducting himself at this point. I tweeted about it earlier, so I don't mean to be repetitive, but imagine if Ron DeSantis held his his press conference this week where they were getting the vaccine, and he talked about that, and he answered questions that he just stood there, almost like a West Wing episode, and answered as many questions that reporters such as yourself has about the vaccine, about the process, and where you just get bored with him, where you guys in the TV world cut away from him after 20 minutes because he's boring you on the logistics of getting millions of doses. this is part of the issue overall with COVID, is that there isn't enough information. I mean, we're very knowledgeable because this is our livelihood. Imagine if you are, hardworking single mom right now, scrambling to get, presents under the tree. You have no idea you don't have time to read the news. You don't have time to pay attention to a Ron DeSantis press conference. And so I think that the very basics of blocking and tackling here, of informing the public of what the vaccine does, why they should take it, that's what the governor should be doing.
Kenya, let me ask you, there is a long history of mistrust between the black community and the government when it comes to vaccinations. That is certainly very deserved given this country's history. How can we convince more Americans, not just people of color, to get this vaccine? Because if we don't get a critical number of them who receive it, then it's going to defeat the purpose.
Well, I think the spotlight on a number of heavy hitters standing up to say that they are taking the vaccine. For instance, you had Presidents Clinton, Obama, and also Bush say that they would be taking the vaccine. I think that's a start. But then also there was when we're talking about getting more people of color to embrace, the vaccine, there was, excuse me, a black nurse who was one of the first to take it in New York. Also, Dr. Corbett with the CDC, who has been behind the development of the vaccine. These folks, putting them in the front also kind of helps in that way, but not probably as much as some may be thinking. It really is just a matter of putting more information, as Peter is saying, being more transparent and putting more information about the vaccine and how it helps. That is going to be what gets more folks on board.
Yeah, and I really do think Peter is right. If you stood there, you answered the questions that you knew and said, we don't know yet on the questions that you don't know the answer to, I think that actually drives people's trust in you when you can admit that you don't know the answer to certain questions. So we'll see how that goes. When we return, will Puerto Rico become a state? It may happen even if Democrats don't win back the Senate. We'll break it down with the Bay Area congressman who wants to introduce the bill to make it happen when Battleground Florida returns. Welcome back to Battleground Florida. In the November election that just passed, Puerto Ricans approved a referendum to become a U.S. state. I sat down this week with Bay Area Congressman Darren Soto, who now plans to introduce a bill to make it happen. I started by asking him why this means so much to him personally.
Sure, being the only Floridian congressman of Puerto Rican descent, this is family to me.
This past referendum in November was the 6th vote on statehood in Puerto Rico. Previous ones either weren't official or they didn't have high enough participation. There were some where groups boycotted them. This one was a yes, but the margin in voting for statehood was tight. It was 52% in favor, 48% opposed. Two questions. Why do you think the margin was so tight? And does that send a clear enough message that Puerto Ricans want to be a state?
Well, the margin was tight because it was the hardest question. A simple yes or no statehood question in a general election ballot with high turnout. I think there's always going to be concerns about the unknown, whether it is everything from the future of language there and culture to issues related to Olympic teams to, yes, paying federal income taxes, but they do pay Social Security and other payroll taxes already, and they also get a lot of federal funds down there. So there's always going to be some uncertainties, yet you saw statehood get a majority in what it was the toughest question. It wasn't split up with independence or with Commonwealth. They asked a straight up question to make it simple for everybody. And even with all this going on, people decided by a majority yes. They've been through so much. And now with COVID-19, this would have been far different for Puerto Rico if they had 2 U.S. senators and 4 members of Congress fighting for them.
Puerto Rico's incoming governor, Governor-elect Pedro Pierluisi, said statehood or not, Puerto Ricans will still, quote, speak Spanish, eat rice and beans, and dance the salsa. We know that Puerto Ricans have a thriving community in the United States, many thriving communities, and that there's something unique about being Puerto Rican. Do you think that is something that might scare people who oppose statehood, that Puerto Ricans wouldn't be, quote, American enough in these unfortunately divided racial times that we're living in?
So I think Americans both in the diaspora of Puerto Ricans and on the island, view themselves as Americans. And they've served in higher percentages of the U.S. military than many states. They are proud of their American citizenship. And when it comes to language, that'd be a determination for the Puerto Rico legislature. Federal proceedings, U.S. government proceedings are already in English and would continue to be in English. But some of these fears like that, we see other parallels. In Alaska, they have multiple different Native American languages that they use in their local proceedings. We see that in New Mexico. We see it in other areas of the country. So I think these cultural issues, sometimes they're scare tactics used by opposition. And what we're really talking about here is there's a small group of folks, more so in the diaspora than on the island, who want the island to be independent. And so they're willing to try to stop this at every turn when Puerto Ricans on the island don't want independence. 90 to 95% of them oppose that. And so I always get concerned about some folks who they want it to be independent, so they're willing to force the island to be a commonwealth, a territory, perpetually until they get their way. And that's simply not what a majority of Puerto Ricans want. The current status isn't working. It's a disaster down there. Hurricane Maria, earthquakes, the COVID-19 crisis, the PROMESA cuts, the quality of life is nosediving. And so we need to help with federal representation and federal equality. And look, this is about democracy. The people have spoken. Now we need to act.
You bring up sort of a segue into my next question. Republicans likely are afraid, at least in the Senate, that the admission of Puerto Rico as a state would likely be 2 solidly Democratic Senate seats. But that may not be the case. You know, Hawaii was admitted when it was assumed that would be good for Republicans. Turns out the island now currently mostly votes Democratic, but we know that those winds shift over time. My question to you is, should that matter? Is this about more than just how it affects the balance of power?
Well, first, this is about democracy. And second, it's not true anyway. The island's resident commissioner is a statehood Republican. The island's governor is a statehood Democrat. I work with both of them very closely, and I'll be introducing, along with Jennifer Gonzalez-Colon, within the first week or two of January, in all likelihood. It'll be a lot similar to the bill that Jennifer Gonzalez-Colon filed for this Congress that I've already co-sponsored onto. That one goes through a lot of the different issues, from taxes to timetables to agencies working together, all the different details that will need to be hammered out.
That bill, obviously with Democrats controlling the House, would likely pass the House. But unless Democrats win both seats in Georgia next month, they will be dependent on Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, to even bring the bill to the Senate floor. He has called Puerto Rican statehood, quote, radical and, quote, full-bore socialism. I'm not sure I understand his argument there. Can you explain what is radical or socialist about Puerto Rico becoming a state?
Well, of course, there's nothing about either of those things. This is about democracy. This is as old as the Republic. We vote and we admit new states to the Union. There's been this kind of garbage that's happened for years. They thought Texas couldn't be a state because it was a nation. They thought New Mexico couldn't be a state because there were too many Hispanics there. They thought Alaska, there were too many natives there. In Utah, they faced religious discrimination over and over. We've seen these kind of scare tactics. And the irony is, this is as American and as democratic as our republic itself. There's nothing about any of those things other than a scare tactic, because he's more worried about power than he is about democracy in this instance. And that's where our 2 U.S. senators have to step up. You know, they've campaigned on this. They have gotten many Puerto Ricans in Florida to vote for them based upon this. Whether it's Democrats or Republicans, the majority of us support statehood in Florida. It's about 2/3 or more of us. So this has repercussions in future elections. There's promises that have been made, and now's the time for action. And our 2 U.S. senators from Florida play a big part of it. And also, we have to mention President-elect Biden has come out in support of statehood. He mentioned that in his speech on the first day of Hispanic Heritage Month in my district, in Kissimmee. So we know we're going to have a president who will sign it into law. Before, they had excuses because President Trump had said he was opposed to it. But we now have the U.S. House and a U.S. president who will be ready to go. And the question will be whether the Senate's going to continue to make Puerto Ricans second-class citizens after they voted in a high turnout election for statehood.
Congressman Darren Soto of Florida's 9th District, thank you so much for joining Battleground Florida. Please stay in touch and come back as this bill progresses into the next year, and have a wonderful holiday season and a Merry Christmas, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you as well. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Battleground Florida. Joe Biden is the president-elect, and it's officially official this time. The Electoral College voted this week to certify Joe Biden as the winner of the 2020 presidential election. There is a lot of pressure now that all these legal challenges from the Trump campaign have failed to overturn these results for Republicans in one or the other House of Congress to challenge the Electoral College results. Kenya, I'll start with you. Do you see Senator Rick Scott or Senator Marco Rubio being among those to challenge the results?
Yeah, this is a tricky one. I'm not quite sure exactly where either stands right now in regards to challenging those results. And they've been loyal Trump supporters throughout his entire presidency. So it would be kind of, strange to see them, turn their backs now and move, say, let's move forward and, support the electoral votes. I'm a little concerned about exactly how that will play out, especially for Rubio, because there's been, some open talk now about his possibly getting a challenger to his seat. And so for him, things are very tricky. Will he challenge the electoral vote? Will he support Trump? It remains to be seen. But what is known is that for Trump's folks, they're very strong still in their support for the president. And my thinking is that just like he has done throughout his presidency, anyone that he, anoints or touches, they're going to get behind. So if, Rubio doesn't get the support of the president, his supporters may follow Trump.
Steve, what do you think? Does either one of them challenge? And regardless of whether that, or maybe it might be part of your answer, do you think Rubio gets a challenger in 2022?
Well, Mitch McConnell's been really trying to get none of his senators to issue a challenge, because then each Republican senator would have to take a vote on this, and he doesn't want to have all these people, these possibly vulnerable Republicans, vulnerable to a challenge from the right, to have to say yes or no, and remains in question whether that's going to happen. Tommy Tuberville has said he's going to just do it when he gets sworn in after January 3rd. It's quite possible that Rubio has tried to been on Trump's side ever since the primary in 2016. He spoke at a rally in Miami just before the election. So it remains to be seen, if that's going to be enough, though, to prevent a challenge from the right.
Peter, does this happen? And do you think Trump retains as much power as he has within the Republican Party after January 20th?
I think Rubio will be challenged. I think part of his problem is that he is a little bit too independent for Trump's liking. And I think that, whether it be on a foreign policy issue or something like that, and the proximity of Rubio in Miami and Trump at Mar-a-Lago, there's going to be a butting of the heads there. And so I could see a scenario like what you're seeing now play out in Georgia, where Trump tweets at those folks all the time. I think that could happen to Rubio there. There's no lack of candidates here also on the far right. They might want to take on little Marco at this point. So I think Marco's got a very he's got a very difficult path to re-election.
Panelists, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate you all being here and taking your time and giving us your expertise. Battleground Florida continues in a moment with a preview of Meet the Press. We'll be right back. Meet the Press is next. Moderator Chuck Todd will speak with incoming U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy. Programming note, there will be no political show the next 2 weeks because I am off on vacation. So have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Battleground Florida will be back on January 10th.